May 1943, Tunisia. American soldiers stood in an olive grove, staring at an abandoned German Tiger tank, tactical number 712. This wasn't a destroyed tank. There were no shell holes, no fire damage, no battle scars. The crew had simply walked away from one of the most feared weapons in the world. The Americans didn't understand why. The Tiger was supposed to be invincible. Its armor could shrug off direct hits from every Allied tank gun. Its 88mm cannon could kill a Sherman from over a mile away. Why would anyone abandon such a monster? The answer was written in the empty fuel gauges. The Tiger had run dry. And when American engineers at Aberdeen Proving Ground in Maryland and began testing it, they discovered something that would change how the entire war was fought. The Tiger tank had a fatal flaw that no amount of armor could protect against. This is the story of how logistics defeated Germany's superweapon. The Beast Unveiled. When the first Tigers rolled into battle in Tunisia in December 1942, they caused panic among Allied forces. At the Battle of Kasserine Pass in February 1943, May 1943, Tunisia. American soldiers stood in an olive grove, staring at an abandoned German Tiger tank, tactical number 712. This wasn't a destroyed tank. There were no shell holes, no fire damage, no battle scars. The crew had simply walked away from one of the most feared weapons in the world. The Americans didn't understand why. The Tiger was supposed to be invincible. Its armor could shrug off direct hits from every Allied tank gun. Its 88mm cannon could kill a Sherman from over a mile away. Why would anyone abandon such a monster? The answer was written in the empty fuel gauges. The Tiger had run dry. And when American engineers shipped this captured beast back to Aberdeen Proving Ground in Maryland and began testing it, they discovered something that would change how the entire war was fought. The Tiger tank had a fatal flaw that no amount of armor could protect against. This is the story of how logistics defeated Germany's superweapon. The Beast Unveiled. When the first Tigers rolled into battle in Tunisia in December 1942, they caused panic among Allied forces. At the Battle of Kasserine Pass in February 1943, American tankers got their first real taste of what the Tiger could do. Lieutenant Kurt Wolff, a German tank commander, watched through his binoculars as American tanks approached. 30 M4 Shermans and light M3 tanks were rolling toward his position. His 14-tank company included several Tigers. The Americans thought they had numbers on their side. They were wrong. The Tigers opened fire at ranges the Americans didn't think were possible. Over a mile away, 88mm shells punched through Sherman armor like it was paper. American tank crews watched in horror as their rounds bounced harmlessly off the Tiger's frontal armor. One German commander reportedly wiped the impact mark off his tank with a handkerchief after an American shell ricocheted away. The slaughter was complete. The 1st Armored Division lost 48 M4 tanks in a single day. American crews learned a terrifying lesson. You couldn't fight a Tiger head-on. The conventional wisdom became simple. It took 5 Shermans to kill one Tiger, and 4 of those Shermans wouldn't be going home. But there was something the Americans didn't see that day, something that would prove more deadly to the Tiger than any Allied gun. The terrible math. When American engineers at Aberdeen Proving Ground began testing Tiger 712, they documented everything: engine performance, armor thickness, gun accuracy, mechanical reliability. But one set of numbers stood out above all others.
The fuel consumption figures were staggering. The Tiger I consumed approximately 2.75 gallons of fuel per mile traveled. Let me put that in perspective. A modern car gets about 30 miles per gallon. The Tiger got less than half a mile per gallon. The tank carried 125 gallons of fuel in its 4 internal tanks. Under perfect road conditions, with an experienced driver who knew how to manage the engine, the Tiger could travel about 120 miles before needing to refuel. That was the absolute best-case scenario. In combat conditions, everything changed. Driving cross-country, the Tiger's range dropped to 68 miles. In heavy combat, with constant maneuvering, starting and stopping, running at full power, that range could plummet to as little as 30 miles. 30 miles! That's less distance than most Americans drive to work. The Americans compared this to their own Sherman tank, which required about 2 gallons per mile. Still thirsty by any standard, but the Sherman carried 175 gallons and had nearly double the operational range of a Tiger. The British Churchill tank consumed even less fuel and could travel further. Every Allied medium tank could operate longer and deeper into enemy territory than the mighty Tiger. Colonel George Jarrett, who oversaw the Aberdeen testing, wrote in his intelligence assessment that the Tiger's fuel consumption represented a fundamental weakness that could be exploited. He was right in ways he couldn't have imagined. The logistics nightmare. But the fuel consumption was only part of the problem. The real killer was the logistics chain needed to keep Tigers running. A Tiger consumed 150 gallons of fuel for a 60-mile journey. That's 3 full fuel trucks just for one tank, for one trip. A single Tiger battalion with 45 tanks required a convoy of tanker trucks stretching for miles just to fill up once. The German military planners knew the numbers before the war. Their estimates predicted that Tigers could travel 121 miles on roads and 68 miles off-road before refueling. But these calculations were based on ideal conditions: peacetime driving, experienced crews, and perfect maintenance. Combat reality was different. A Tiger battalion consumed more fuel in a day of fighting than an entire infantry division. German logistics officers pulled their hair out trying to keep the beasts fed. Every gallon of gasoline had to be transported from refineries in Germany or Romania, shipped across hostile seas or through partisan-infested territory, and delivered to the front lines where Allied aircraft hunted supply convoys day and night. And Germany didn't have enough fuel to begin with. By 1943, Allied bombing had crippled German synthetic fuel production. The Romanian oil fields that supplied much of Germany's petroleum were under constant air attack. Every drop of gasoline was precious. So the German High Command faced an impossible choice. They could deploy their most powerful weapon, the Tiger tank, but doing so consumed fuel needed by thousands of other vehicles. Every Tiger that rolled to the front meant trucks that couldn't deliver ammunition, ambulances that couldn't evacuate wounded, or fighters that couldn't take off. The Tiger was so fuel-hungry that it was literally starving the rest of the German war machine.
Tunisia, the first warning. This is what happened to Tiger 712 in Tunisia. Heavy Panzer Battalion 501 received their Tigers in December 1942 and threw them into battle almost immediately. The initial engagements were successful. Tigers destroyed Allied tanks and terrified infantry. But problems appeared within weeks. The Tigers couldn't keep up with offensive operations. While lighter Panzer IVs could advance 30 or 40 miles in a day, the Tigers had to stop constantly to refuel. German supply trucks struggled across the rough terrain of North Africa, and many never made it through Allied air attacks. Battalion reports from May 1943 reveal the crisis. One passage noted that Tigers had completed a 400-kilometer movement, which surprised everyone because nobody expected the tanks to travel that far on available fuel.
But that journey had consumed the fuel allocation for an entire month. As the Tunisian campaign collapsed in spring 1943, German forces tried to evacuate. They destroyed most of their equipment rather than let it fall into Allied hands. But some Tigers, like number 712, were simply abandoned when they ran out of fuel. The crew couldn't destroy it properly because they didn't have time. They just walked away. When Lieutenant Sewell of the British 104th Tank Workshop found Tiger 712, the tank was mechanically sound. It could have fought. It could have retreated. But it couldn't move without fuel. And fuel hadn't arrived. So one of Germany's most powerful weapons sat helpless in an olive grove waiting to be captured. The Americans studied Tiger 712 intensively. They discovered something else troubling for the Germans. The Tiger's Maybach engine was complex and temperamental. It needed high-quality fuel and skilled maintenance. In the hands of inexperienced crews or with low-grade fuel, engines failed regularly. A German combat report from Heavy Panzer Battalion 501 admitted that most engine failures resulted from poor driver training. The report noted that 5 engines had reached over 3,000 kilometers without serious problems, but only when driven by experienced crews who understood the machine. Most Tiger drivers weren't that experienced. The tanks were rushed into combat before crews had adequate training, and when engines failed far from supply bases, the Tigers had to be abandoned or destroyed. The Eastern Front, drowning in mud and fuel. The fuel crisis grew worse on the Eastern Front. The vast distances of Russia turned the Tigers' short range into a death sentence. A Tiger battalion advancing 100 miles consumed roughly 12,000 gallons of fuel. In Russia, that meant fuel convoys traveling hundreds of miles through territory where Soviet partisans ambushed trucks and destroyed fuel depots. Many times, the fuel never arrived. German commanders learned to plan operations around fuel availability rather than tactical opportunities. They couldn't launch attacks when conditions were favorable if they didn't have fuel. They had to wait for supply convoys, and while they waited, the Soviets reinforced their positions. Winter made everything worse. The Tigers' interleaved road wheels, which distributed weight and gave the tank its smooth ride, had a fatal flaw. Mud and snow packed between the wheels and froze solid overnight. In the morning, the tanks couldn't move. Crews had to light fires under the tanks to thaw the wheels, burning precious fuel just to get unstuck. The same Maybach engine that guzzled fuel also overheated in summer and struggled to start in winter. Cooling systems froze, fuel lines iced up. The Tigers that did start consumed even more fuel in cold weather just to keep the engine running. Soviet forces learned that they didn't need to destroy Tigers, they just needed to make them run out of fuel. Soviet doctrine emphasized cutting German supply lines. Partisan attacks focused on fuel trucks and supply depots. The strategy worked brilliantly. Abandoned Tigers littered the Russian landscape. Some had mechanical failures, but many simply ran dry. German retreat orders often came with instructions to destroy immobilized Tigers. The 88mm cannon that made the Tiger so fearsome became a liability. Its weight, combined with the heavy armor, made recovery nearly impossible without specialized equipment and lots of fuel. The Ardennes, Piper's gamble. The Tiger's fuel consumption reached its catastrophic conclusion in the Ardennes in December 1944. Hitler's last great offensive, the Battle of the Bulge, depended on capturing American fuel supplies. The plan was audacious. Kampfgruppe Piper, led by SS Lieutenant Colonel Joachim Piper, would spearhead the attack with the 1st SS Panzer Division. His force included some of the most powerful tanks ever built, including Tiger II heavy tanks. The Tiger II was even thirstier than the original Tiger. It consumed 2 gallons of fuel per mile. With an 860-liter fuel tank, the Tiger II could theoretically travel 170 kilometers on roads and 110 kilometers off-road. But combat conditions meant much less. German planners calculated that they had enough fuel for the attacking forces to travel 90 to 100 miles. That wasn't nearly enough to reach Antwerp, the ultimate objective. The entire offensive was based on a gamble. The Germans would capture American fuel depots along the way and use that fuel to keep going. Piper understood the stakes. His Kampfgruppe had 4,800 men, 600 vehicles, and limited fuel. From the start, he knew he couldn't reach the Meuse River without capturing fuel. He deviated from his assigned route to attack Bullingen, where intelligence said there was an American fuel depot. He found fuel there and seized 50,000 gallons. For a moment, the gamble seemed to be working. But then everything went wrong. American engineers blew bridges as they retreated, forcing Piper to take longer routes. Each detour consumed fuel. American defenders at crossroads forced Piper into firefights, burning fuel as his tanks maneuvered for position. The tight forest roads meant his vehicles couldn't spread out, creating massive traffic jams where engines idled, burning fuel while going nowhere. At Stavelot, American troops evacuated a massive fuel depot just before Piper's advance guard arrived. 1 million gallons of gasoline in jerry cans sat on a road just 2 miles from Piper's route, guarded by a single company of Belgian soldiers. Piper never knew it was there. He drove past perhaps the largest unguarded fuel stockpile in Europe, missing it by minutes and miles. On December 19, Piper had advanced to Stoumont. His fuel situation was desperate. Radio messages back to headquarters pleaded for supply. German command attempted an air resupply mission on December 21st, dropping fuel canisters from Luftwaffe aircraft. 90% of the canisters fell outside Piper's defensive perimeter. The few that landed inside provided barely enough fuel to keep radios running and reposition a few tanks. Piper assessed his situation. He didn't have enough fuel to cross the bridge west of Stoumont and continue to the Meuse. His Kampfgruppe, which had been the tip of the spear for Germany's last offensive, was stranded, out of fuel, surrounded, finished. On December 24th, Christmas Eve, Piper made the decision. He would abandon all his vehicles and break out on foot. His force included some of the most advanced tanks in the world. Tiger IIs that no Allied tank could penetrate from the front. Panthers with excellent guns and good mobility. All of them useless without fuel. Piper led his remaining 800 men through American lines under cover of darkness. They left behind 135 armored vehicles, including multiple Tigers. American soldiers found them the next day, sitting silent in Le Glaise. The crews had opened the fuel caps to show they were empty before they left. One Tiger II still sits in Le Glaise today, a monument to the battle. Tourists photograph it, children climb on it, but it hasn't moved since December 1944, when its fuel ran out.
Why the Tiger failed. The Americans who studied captured Tigers understood something fundamental about modern warfare. It doesn't matter how thick your armor is or how powerful your gun if you can't get fuel. The Tiger represented the peak of German tank engineering. Its armor protection was the best in the world. Its gun could kill any Allied tank at ranges where return fire was impossible. In single combat, the Tiger was superior to any Allied tank throughout the war. But war isn't single combat. War is logistics, supply chains, fuel trucks, and spare parts. War is being able to move 500 tanks across 1,000 miles and have them all arrived ready to fight.
War is keeping those tanks fed with fuel and ammunition for weeks of continuous operations. Germany could build Tigers. They built 1,347 of them. But they couldn't fuel them. They couldn't supply them. They couldn't maintain them in the field. Every Tiger that rolled off the production line represented resources that could have built 21 artillery pieces, or 4 Panzer IV tanks, or hundreds of trucks. The Panzer IV had its own problems, but it used half the fuel of a Tiger and was much easier to maintain. For the cost of one Tiger, Germany could field 4 Panzer IVs with longer operational ranges and better reliability. American and Soviet doctrine focused on mass production and logistics. The Sherman tank was inferior to the Tiger in direct combat, but the Allies built 50,000 of them. The T-34 was outmatched by the Tiger's gun and armor, but the Soviets built 35,000 of them. More importantly, the Allies could fuel their tanks and keep them running. German post-war interrogations revealed the extent of the crisis. Erwin Otters, an engineer at Henschel who helped design the Tiger, admitted that fuel consumption was known to be a problem from the beginning. But there was no solution that didn't compromise the tank's performance. A less powerful engine meant less speed and less ability to move the heavy armor. Reducing armor meant vulnerability to Allied guns. Carrying more fuel meant adding weight, which increased fuel consumption even more. The Tiger was a technical masterpiece trapped in a logistical nightmare. It was the wrong tank for the war Germany was fighting. The lessons learned. By late 1944, Allied intelligence had compiled comprehensive data on Tiger fuel consumption. The information spread through Allied armies. Tank commanders learned that the best way to defeat a Tiger wasn't to fight it head-on. It was to force it to maneuver, to make it chase you, to burn its fuel. American doctrine evolved. Don't attack Tigers in open terrain where they can use their superior range. Force them into towns and forests where they have to move constantly. Cut their supply lines, bomb their fuel trucks, make them run. The strategy worked. German tank forces throughout 1944 and 1945 were increasingly immobile, not because they were destroyed in combat, but because they couldn't move. Hundreds of Panthers, Tigers, and other armored vehicles were abandoned during retreats, left behind when fuel ran out. The German military produced some of the finest weapons of World War II, but they lost because they couldn't fuel them, couldn't maintain them, and couldn't replace them when they broke down. The Tiger tank, meant to be a war-winning superweapon, became a symbol of German strategic failure. In the olive groves of Tunisia, on the steppes of Russia, in the forests of the Ardennes, Tigers sat abandoned. Not destroyed by Allied guns, but killed by empty fuel tanks. The Americans understood this when they tested Tiger 712 at Aberdeen. The British understood it when they captured Tiger 131. The Soviets understood it when they overran hundreds of Tigers abandoned during German retreats. The Tiger's 88mm gun could kill at a mile, but it couldn't run on empty, and in the end, that's what defeated it. Epilogue. Tiger 712 sat at Aberdeen Proving Ground for decades after the war, slowly rusting. Visitors would walk around it, marvel at its size, photograph the thick armor. But the real lesson wasn't visible. It was written in the test reports locked in archives. Fuel consumption? 2.75 gallons per mile. Range? 120 miles on roads, 68 miles off-road, 30 miles in combat. Those numbers told the story of why Germany lost. Not because their weapons weren't good enough, but because they couldn't sustain them. The Tiger tank was a perfect example of German thinking during World War II. Technical excellence without strategic sense. A super weapon that consumed more resources than it was worth. Today, only a handful of Tigers survive. Most sit in museums, silent and still. They're impressive to look at, but they can't move. And that's fitting. Because even when they were new, even when they had fuel, even when they terrified every Allied soldier who saw them, the Tigers were doomed. Doomed by their own appetite. Doomed by logistics. Doomed by math. The Americans captured one intact in Tunisia and learned its secrets. And what they learned helped win the war. Not with a better tank, but with better logistics, better planning, and better understanding of what modern war required. The Tiger was feared. It was deadly. It was magnificent. But it was also fatally flawed. And that flaw, measured in gallons per mile, helped defeat Nazi Germany.